Miguel was a rather well-known showman in the capital. He hosted a popular weekly show where he invited distinguished guests for sensational conversations over a cup of coffee. He was approaching 30, dressed like a dandy, with slick black hair tied in a ponytail at the nape of his neck, and he indulged himself in everything. On that sunny day, Miguel was rushing to a shoot when he realized at the last moment that there wasn't a single pack of cigarettes left in the glove compartment. He pulled up at the supermarket and, carelessly leaving his fashionable red car on the roadside, entered through the sliding glass doors. Fortunately for him, there was no queue. There was only a lone, wrinkled old woman at the cashier's counter with a bun in her hand, asking the female cashier something. She had stiff curly hair down to her shoulders, a nose piercing, and the name Paula on her badge. Miguel got in line behind the old woman, checking his smartphone as he walked. "Grandma, I'm sorry, I just can't." He heard Paula's voice. "Why is this taking so long?" Miguel thought irritably, glancing at the expensive watch on his left wrist. "My grandson will send the money tomorrow, and I'll pay," the old woman said with a trembling voice. Her eyes were pitiful, and the hand holding the bun was shaking badly. Miguel glanced at his watch again. Time was slipping away inexorably. "Grandma, I would help, but I'm not allowed to," Paula replied impassively, and even her curls seemed to sway in a negative gesture. It was evident that the woman would gladly get rid of the bothersome old lady but had no idea how to do it. The grandmother, on her part, seemed determined not to give in. Miguel impatiently rubbed the tip of his nose, a habit he couldn't shake off. "Ladies, it seems things are dragging on here indefinitely," he intervened in his usual showman manner and, randomly pulling out a large bill from his pocket, casually threw it on the counter. "Let the grandma take everything she needs, and please give me those green ones over there." The old woman seemed to have not understood at all what had happened. Most likely, she was a bit hard of hearing. Paula, however, looked at Miguel with a mix of gratitude and puzzlement and reached for the cigarettes. Miguel hastily snatched the pack from her hand and almost ran to the exit. Fortunately, nobody had yet objected to his car, and the showman safely plopped down in the seat, ignoring the crumpled checkered jacket that cost a fortune. Turning on the music, he drove off, not noticing someone standing at the entrance to the supermarket, watching him with a long, pensive gaze. A slender girl in a red dress with black polka dots stood on the sidewalk for a while, as if pondering something, then started walking up the street. Exactly 10 days later, Miguel discovered a strange bluish envelope on the windshield. As usual, he was running late for the shoot, so the appearance of an unfamiliar item in his personal space didn't particularly excite him. "Is this a fine?" he exclaimed aloud. "Are you serious?" "Just what I needed." Miguel grabbed the envelope and tossed it onto the dashboard before getting behind the wheel. Along the way, he conveniently forgot about the mysterious message and didn't remember it until the end of the workday. However, when the tired and contented man got back behind the wheel, the blue envelope resurfaced vividly in his memory. He reached for it with one hand, tore the edge with the other, and pulled out a quadruple-folded sheet of time-yellowed paper. "This doesn't seem like a fine," muttered Miguel under his breath. He didn't know why his heart was pounding so hard. Perhaps it was the paper itself or its elusive scent reminding him of something long forgotten. With trembling hands, the man unfolded the sheet, only to drop it on his lap from the overflow of emotions. What he saw was so unexpected and shocking that Miguel sat motionless for a long time. Voices, images from the past, chaotically flashed before his mind's eye. He tried to fight them off, willing them away like one would shove old worn-out belongings to the back of a closet, but they reappeared at the forefront of his consciousness, even more vivid and frightening. After several minutes, Miguel finally let out a loud exhale and, with trembling hands, delicately picked up the sheet. No, he hadn't made a mistake, and what he saw wasn't a product of his imagination. The drawing on the paper depicted a wooden construction resembling a marionette doll. The inscription above read, "Jorge." The details were also accompanied by signatures, written in a handwriting painfully familiar. Miguel wouldn't mistake those curves and lines for any others. Only one person in the world wrote like that, and he was no more. Suddenly, the man noticed that beside the neat drawing, someone had crudely sketched a map of some terrain with a cross in the middle. A pirate treasure map quickly flashed through Miguel's mind. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and nervously lit one, not bothering to even open the window. Miguel didn't notice that ashes were falling directly onto his light-colored trousers and suede shoes. Right now, he was somewhere far away. The man saw before him a simple wooden house, a fence with a gate, heard the cries of roosters that woke him up every morning at dawn. Then Miguel remembered with melancholy that there were scheduled shoots for the next morning. He needed to go home, go to sleep, then wake up to another day in the life of a successful showman. He reached for his smartphone and dialed Carla's number, a young model he had recently met at one of the social events. "Hey, Miguel, we won't be able to meet today," the girl quickly chattered. "I'm at a reception, you know, everyone's here, from actors to directors. I can't get away, sorry." The man didn't respond, silently pressing the end call button. Carla's chirpy voice, which had previously delighted him, now seemed cloying and artificial. His hand instinctively reached for the glove compartment. Miguel opened it and began rummaging inside. Finally, amidst packs of paper napkins, mints, and old receipts, he found a rough wooden box that fit in his palm. Miguel opened it, revealing a wooden ladybug he had carved as a child, painted red with black dots delicately applied with a thin brush. As the man gazed at the wooden insect, tears unexpectedly welled up in his eyes. Miguel couldn't remember the last time he had cried. Over the years spent in the capital, his heart had been encased in a thick armor that seemed impenetrable. For a long time, this had suited him just fine, but a faint inner voice whispered to him that it couldn't go on like this. Miguel had to find out who had passed him the strange envelope, a message from the past. He started the engine and set off. Initially, Miguel wanted to swing by home and grab a few things, but his hands confidently guided the car onto the road leading out of the city. He realized that this was for the best. He was afraid he might change his mind at the last moment. Miguel spent the entire night on the road and reached the tiny town, more like a village, at dawn, where he had spent his entire childhood and youth. Memories from the past became clearer and more vivid in his mind. There he was, just a boy, running to the pond to watch the fat red carp. There his grandmother buying him mint ice cream in a crispy cone, and there his grandfather. Miguel forcefully cut off the memory. Thinking about his grandfather was too painful. He focused on the road, although at this early hour, there was no one else on it but him. He drove past familiar buildings that hadn't changed a bit over the years. Miguel stopped at a gas station to fill up and grab a snack. Behind the counter, a young girl named Alba, as her badge indicated, dozed off. She seemed very familiar to him. Miguel stared at the girl's face and her straight dark brown hair for a while, then remembered seeing her as a 5-year-old girl. Sensing his gaze, Alba woke up and, greeting him warmly, made coffee and warmed up a hot dog. Of course, she didn't recognize him. Miguel thanked the girl and left. The coffee refreshed him, and he got back behind the wheel. He didn't have much further to go. He traveled this path in silence, focused on the road he once knew like the back of his hand. Indeed, nothing had changed here. It seemed to Miguel that time had inexplicably bypassed this corner of the earth. A man turned into a narrow winding alley, drove a few meters, and stopped by a gate painted in bright red. Behind the fence stood an old 2-story house of a somewhat dirty pink shade. Miguel didn't want to look to his right, but his gaze betrayingly slid up the street. He was right about his feelings. Everything remained the same here, and where there should have been a neighboring house, there was only an empty gap. Miguel coughed. He thought he caught a whiff of the same smoke that had haunted him for so long. It couldn't be. The fire had been extinguished more than a decade ago. Apparently, the smell had not yet dissipated from his painful memories. The man felt dizzy for a moment, but he forced himself to take a deep breath, just as one of the many psychiatrists he had seen had taught him when trying to cope with the aftermath of childhood trauma. Miguel took 5 or 6 deep breaths, and he felt a bit better. Stepping forward to the red gate, he found himself so close that he could reach out and touch its cracked surface. How many times had Miguel opened this gate in his dreams, and now, looking at it in reality, he couldn't forgive his own cowardice. Finally, he pulled the handle, but the gate was locked. Then Miguel rang the bell, which miraculously remained untouched by time. The sound echoed in the clear air, but there was no answer. Everything in the house remained motionless, as if the man were looking at a voluminous picture. Miguel felt uneasy. What if all of this was still just a dream? Fortunately, he remembered that it was still early. Even if someone was in the house, they were probably fast asleep. To confirm his guess, the man carefully examined the windows. The glass looked clean, and he noticed well-kept flowers on the windowsills. So, the house was inhabited. This thought reassured Miguel. He returned to the car, trying not to look towards the frightening gap between the houses, sat in the driver's seat, and closed his eyes. At that moment, the man fell into an uneasy sleep. He dreamed of a girl from his childhood standing by the open red gate, waving at him. Miguel woke up abruptly, as if jolted. His mobile phone was ringing. He glanced at the display, 9 a.m, an incoming call from Claudia, his faithful assistant. Of course, he hadn't bothered to inform her that there wouldn't be a morning show today. Perhaps there wouldn't be one ever again. Miguel sighed and turned off the phone. At the moment, he didn't feel the strength or the desire to say anything in his defense. At that moment, the red gate swung open, and a woman in her 50s stepped onto the street with a woven basket, which she held carefully by its long, comfortable handles. Miguel remembered that basket well. He had helped carry it home from the vegetable market many times. Catching the woman's strange gaze through the glass, he hastily set his smartphone down on the adjacent seat and, with trembling hands, opened the door. The woman stood there, looking at him bewilderedly, as if she had forgotten where she was going. Miguel approached her, unsure of what to say. For a minute, they silently stared at each other, and then he opened his arms and hugged the woman tightly. "Aunt Marta," he whispered. "Miguelito," the woman replied, discreetly wiping tears from her eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. Aunt Marta only nodded in response. They stood there, looking at each other for a while longer, then the woman suddenly snapped out of it. "Miguelito, come on in quickly, you must be tired from the journey. I was about to go for fresh milk, eggs, and greens, but that can wait. I need to make you breakfast. Aunt Marta, you go ahead, and I'll just sit in the kitchen if you don't mind." I grabbed a snack at the gas station. Marta led Miguel into the house, where it smelled just like always of vanilla and oranges. This scent involuntarily reminded him of times when things weren't going well in his life and he needed to calm down. That was how Laura always smelled. Even if she was covered in dirt after one of their adventures, even after swimming in the lake. Miguel was sure it was her natural scent. The man involuntarily glanced up to where the girl's room used to be. His gaze didn't escape Marta's notice. "Laura doesn't live here anymore," she said. Her words sounded mundane, and Miguel didn't understand what exactly Marta was conveying: disappointment, resignation, or deep sadness. He didn't dare ask where she was now. Perhaps Laura had long been married. This thought made Miguel's heart ache painfully. Marta led him to the kitchen and sat him down at the table. "The others are still asleep. The boys have school at 12, and Luis hasn't been working for a long time." Miguel sat at the round table, covered with a familiar childhood lace white tablecloth that Marta's mother had knitted, and memories flooded over him. The sensations were warm, but bitterness of loss and guilt mingled with them. As if understanding his state, Marta, while continuing to speak, carefully avoided meeting his gaze. "No one will disturb you or bother you with questions and conversations. The coffee in the pot is still hot. Sugar is on the table, cream in the fridge. I'll be back soon." With these words, she left Miguel alone with his past. The man quietly inhaled the scent of vanilla and immersed himself in memories. Miguel lived nearby when Aunt Martha's family moved into this house. His parents died, so the boy was taken care of by his grandparents. His grandfather made wooden dolls on strings. His workshop was in the right wing of the house, adjoining a small semi-empty room. A window was cut into the wall between them, and Grandma sewed crimson satin curtains for it, serving as a curtain. On weekends, Grandpa staged puppet shows. He himself invented plays, which he performed so skillfully, voicing the characters with different voices, that children from all over the neighborhood were delighted. They crowded into the room like sardines in a barrel, eagerly awaiting the start of the show. Laura, Aunt Martha's eldest daughter, also came to watch the puppet shows. She was quiet and shy, and at first Miguel didn't even notice her. But one day, Grandpa invited Laura to the workshop to show her how he made a new doll. Until then, only Miguel had been honored with this privilege, so the boy was intrigued. "Why did you invite this girl?" he later asked Grandpa. "I thought she seemed sad and lonely, so I wanted to cheer her up." Miguel began to secretly observe Laura. It turned out they were classmates, but Laura usually sat in a corner and didn't talk to anyone. Most of the time, her attention was absorbed by a book. Miguel noticed that every time Laura read something different. Once he followed her after school and found himself in the city library. He had never been there before and had never seen so many books anywhere else. Laura returned the volumes she had read and chose new ones, a whole stack. It was obvious that they were heavy to carry. Miguel couldn't resist and approached the girl. "Let me carry them," he offered. Laura silently looked at him, and the boy noticed that her eyes had an unusual emerald hue. Understanding that he could be trusted, the girl nodded gratefully and handed him the books. Thus, their friendship began. Since then, Miguel waited for Laura every morning at the red gate to walk to school together. He took her bag, and they walked slowly along the streets, hardly speaking to each other. Miguel liked to watch how the morning sunbeams touched the strands of Laura's dark brown hair, making them look golden. Miguel himself wanted to touch them, but, of course, he didn't dare. One noon, as the kids were returning home from school, Grandpa called them from the workshop window. "Come here, I have something for you," he winked. Miguel and Laura hurried to the workshop. Grandpa handed each of them a wooden box. The kids opened them and gasped. Inside were tiny ladybugs. "Why aren't they colored, Grandpa?" Miguel asked. "I thought you might want to paint them yourselves, little Miguel," Grandpa kindly replied. "Sit down at the table, take the brushes." The kids eagerly set to work, and soon their ladybugs became almost lifelike. After that, they came to Grandpa's workshop many times after school and helped him create new dolls. Laura particularly liked one of them, a fair-haired and blue-eyed Lucia. She often held the doll in her hands, brushing her hair. Seeing this, Grandpa gave Lucia to Laura as a gift. "Lucy feels very lonely," the girl confessed one day. Grandpa and Miguel exchanged surprised glances. Laura rarely spoke. "Does she need a friend?" Grandpa asked. Laura blushed and nodded silently. Then Grandpa took a sheet of paper and began to draw. He wanted Lucy to instantly like her new friend, so he consulted Laura for details every minute. It flattered Laura greatly that Grandpa was asking for her opinion. Finally, the design of the new doll was ready, and Grandpa promised to start making it the next morning. "What will Lucy's friend be called?" Miguel asked. Grandpa looked at Laura, who blushed again. "Jorge," she answered quietly. Grandpa nodded and wrote the name of the new doll above the drawing. Miguel and Laura watched with excitement as Jorge was born. Grandpa took his time, crafting each detail carefully and meticulously. Jorge was almost ready when it all happened. Some noise interrupted Miguel's reminiscing. He looked up and saw a boy about 15 years old descending the stairs, staring at him intently. "You must be Manuel," Miguel figured out. The last time he saw him, he was just a baby. The boy nodded. "I'm Miguel, a longtime friend of your family," the man introduced himself. The boy shrugged. A man of few words, just like his sister, Miguel thought. "What are you interested in?" the man asked, breaking the silence. Manuel silently nodded towards the wall. Miguel turned his head and was astonished. Why hadn't he noticed this before? The far kitchen wall, which used to be empty, was now covered in maps of different places. Miguel got up and approached to examine them closer. They were all hand-drawn with various markings. Your sister also loved maps very much, Miguel said, feeling the weight of nostalgia in his words. Yeah, she gave me a book about pirate treasures, and that's how it all started, the boy unexpectedly spoke up. But Miguel seemed not surprised at all. Manuel's words triggered another memory in his mind. It happened around the same time Grandpa started making Jorge. That morning, as usual, Miguel waited for Laura at the red gate. She appeared, her eyes mysteriously gleaming. We're not going to school today, she announced. Why? Miguel asked, surprised. We'll be reading a book, Laura whispered mysteriously. Miguel was intrigued. He wasn't much of a book lover like the girl, but there was something in her voice and the way she emphasized the word book that made the boy believe he was in for an exciting adventure. They snuck away to the lake and sat on the shore. In Laura's bag were sandwiches and a thermos of hot chocolate. She pulled out the book, and Miguel's eyes lit up with excitement. Pirate stories, he exclaimed, and Laura laughed joyfully. They read the book all day, then built a pirate ship from the scraps of boards they found on the shore. Later, Miguel's grandfather discovered them. The kids were heavily scolded, but it didn't diminish the impression of that serene, warm day. Miguel remembered that it was then that he and Laura shared a dream to find pirate treasure. Though, fate had other plans. Have you two met yet? Miguel heard Martha's voice behind him. She stood at the table, unpacking groceries from the basket, fresh eggs, greens, cheese, homemade milk, marmalade. Manuel, sitting on a chair with his chin resting on his long, skinny legs, mumbled something indistinct in response. Yes, Manuel told me about his hobby, Miguel replied for both of them. Oh, those cards. Martha complained. They're everywhere, soon the whole house will be filled with them. And how many conversations we had about pirate treasures. It's good he's grown up and stopped believing in them. Manuel snorted, indicating with his demeanor that none of that had anything to do with him. Suddenly, Miguel froze in place, remembering the scribbles on the yellowed sheet of paper. He needed to look at them again. Excuse me, I'll just go to the car, he stammered out, hastily heading to the door. He crossed the yard, opened the red gate, and stepped onto the street. By the car, he turned back to the gaping rectangle between the houses, and the smell of burning hit his nose sharply. It's just my imagination, Miguel reminded himself, opened the door, and began searching for the sheet with the drawing. After a sleepless, restless night, he couldn't remember where he had put it. The smell of burning haunted him, and for a moment, it felt like he was enveloped in fiery heat. Miguel's head spun, and he sat down, burying his face in his hands on the steering wheel. It'll pass soon, just breathe deeply, the man reminded himself silently. But the visions didn't retreat, on the contrary, the scenes from the past seized his consciousness with renewed vigor. Miguel could no longer resist them. This happened on the day when grandfather was supposed to finish up at Jorge's. Miguel was walking home from school alone. In the middle of the school day, Laura fell ill with stomach pain, and the teacher let her go home. Miguel wanted to escort her, but he wasn't allowed to. The whole class was taking a test. Several blocks from home, he already sensed that something was wrong. People were anxiously talking, pointing at the smoke rising above the rooftops. Miguel heard the word fire several times. He knew it was very dangerous, but it never crossed his mind that it could happen to him and his family. Then he saw familiar faces, neighbors. They were running down their street, shouting loudly, as the space around them grew smaller and smaller. The rest felt like a dream. He heard fire truck sirens, tried to push through the crowd, called for his family, and finally found himself in his grandfather's strong embrace. It's all right, Miguelito, it's all right. We're all safe and sound, it's just a house. Miguel burst into tears. He was so used to their big, cozy house, where objects, furniture, and even the doormat seemed alive. And then a thought pierced him. "But what about Jorge, grandfather?" he shouted. It was very noisy around, and if his voice had been drowned out by 100 other sounds then. If only grandfather hadn't heard him. But grandfather did hear him. He knew how important Jorge was, how the children awaited him. He released his grandson from his embrace and rushed into the burning workshop. No one dared to stop the owner. Miguel waited with a pounding heart. Several minutes passed, but grandfather didn't appear. Maybe Jorge got scared and hid, and grandfather is looking for him, the boy thought, but he'll find him very soon, and everything will be all right. The boy waited and waited, but nothing happened. And then the worst happened. The roof collapsed, and the air was pierced by Grandma's desperate cry. Miguel opened his eyes. The memories beyond that were blurred and more like a fog. He didn't understand himself what was happening for real and what was only in his head. They lived with Marta, and Grandma longed terribly for Grandpa and their home. She hardly ever left the room. Miguel kept going to school, though a wound inside him was bleeding, making it hard to breathe. Laura was always there, holding his hand on the way to school and back. As usual, they hardly spoke, but the scent of vanilla and oranges saved Miguel from falling into the black abyss of despair. True, once Laura wanted to talk to Miguel about Grandpa, but as soon as she mentioned Jorge, the boy had a hysterical fit, and he spent a week in the hospital. After that, Laura became even quieter and spent almost all her time with books, afraid to look Miguel in the eye. And then the grandmother passed away, unable to recover from the loss of her husband. When Miguel turned 16, he ran away, realizing he could no longer stay in Marta's house. Before leaving, he quietly entered Laura's room and gazed at the sleeping girl for a long time, sensing that he was saying goodbye to her forever. Miguel woke up from someone touching his shoulder. He turned his head and saw Marta's worried face. "Are you okay, Miguelito?" the woman asked. "I got worried when you didn't come back for so long." The car door was open. "I think I fell asleep," Miguel replied. Miguel looked around and noticed a drawing of Jorge peeking out from between the seats. He carefully took it out and, stepping out of the car, unfolded it to show Marta. "This is a doll sketch made by Grandpa. And these scribbles, I don't remember." Marta scrutinized the drawing. "This is Laura's handwriting," she finally said. She was also obsessed with treasure hunts and pirate treasures. "You know better than me. But how did Grandpa's drawing end up with her, and why did she draw a map on it?" Miguel asked, realizing Marta probably wouldn't have an answer to his question. As he suspected, Marta shook her head. "You know, Laura hardly ever spoke. She always kept everything to herself." Marta suddenly started crying. "Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I'm a bad mother, am I, Miguelito?" Miguel opened his arms to Marta and let her cry. "Where is she now?" Miguel finally dared to ask. "She lives in the capital. She rarely comes home, calls once a week, but mostly just to stay silent on the phone." "Has she met anyone, gotten married?" Miguel asked, feeling his heart stop as he awaited the answer. Marta shook her head. "I think there's no lonelier soul in the city than our Laura. And it saddens me deeply." Marta cried again, but Miguel suddenly felt very light. "I want to see her. Aunt Marta, please give me Laura's address." Miguel drove confidently as the day outside gradually faded, giving way to a warm evening. Marta's address was entered in the navigator, and Miguel, sensing the meeting, could clearly feel his nervousness. Seeing his childhood friend after so many years was no joke, but Miguel knew that he needed Laura now more than ever before. He briefly stopped by home to take a shower and change into fresh clothes. The answering machine was full of unheard messages, but he paid no attention to it. Miguel quickly got ready and got back behind the wheel. Laura lived in the southern part of the city, where tiny cottages nestled on the hillside. Miguel smiled. He had no doubt that this girl wouldn't choose a skyscraper for her life. Even in the bustling capital, Laura found a place she loved, just as quiet and secluded as she was. Miguel quickly found house number 17. A solitary vanilla-colored lantern burned above the porch, and Miguel's heart suddenly beat a little faster. He climbed a few steps and rang the doorbell. A tinkling sound of a bell echoed from within the house, then everything fell silent again. The silence refused to be disturbed. The house was empty. Miguel glanced at his watch. It was around 9. Where could Laura have spent the evening? At the library? But they've long been closed. Miguel absent-mindedly rubbed the tip of his nose, a childhood habit inherited from his grandfather, which he resorted to in difficult situations. The man was about to leave when suddenly something familiar caught his attention. Something similar he had seen recently. Miguel leaned closer. From the gap between the door and the jamb protruded a blue paper corner. Miguel pulled it, and in his hands was an envelope, exactly like the one with his grandfather's drawing. Impatiently, Miguel tore the edge and pulled out a piece of paper from the envelope. He immediately recognized Laura's light and slightly flamboyant handwriting. "Find me at our spot," Miguel read aloud. "Laura, are you serious?" he exclaimed and unexpectedly burst into laughter. It was the best joke in his life. Miguel got behind the wheel, grabbed a double espresso from the nearest cafe, and set off on the way back. Along the road, he stopped several times to get more coffee and even dozed off in one of the parking lots. At dawn, Miguel was at the lake. He immediately noticed a bright orange tint and the remnants of a campfire nearby. Miguel got back into the car and headed to the nearest supermarket, where he picked up bread, cheese, and sausages. Returning to the lake, he lit a fire and started cooking breakfast. It didn't take half an hour before the tent stirred. "I really hope it's Laura in there and not some 2-meter muscle man," Miguel thought with a laugh. The zipper at the entrance opened, and Miguel felt relieved and joyful as he noticed a delicate female hand. Then its owner appeared. She hadn't changed much, the same long dark brown hair, the same emerald eyes, and fair, almost translucent skin. The girl looked at Miguel in astonishment, as if she couldn't quite believe that he had actually come here. "Hello, Laura," Miguel said softly. She didn't say a word, just tilted her head slightly and smiled in response. But Miguel knew the worth of her smile alone. He approached and hugged Laura. She pressed herself against him with her fragile body, as if afraid that he might suddenly disappear again. And then she cried. "Why are you crying, my dear?" Miguel wondered. "I'm here with you." "Jorge," Laura whispered. "It's my fault." Miguel looked into her eyes. "What are you guilty of?" Laura bit her lip. Translate into English. "On that day my stomach didn't hurt," the girl confessed very quietly. Miguel listened attentively. "I lied to the teacher. I really wanted to see Jorge. I sneaked into your grandfather's workshop." Inside Miguel, everything went cold, but he forced himself to take a deep breath and exhale. Now is not the time for a panic attack. "What were you doing there?" "I took Jorge." "Why, Laura?" "I wanted to hide him, like a treasure, so that later we could dig him up together. And I took him here, to the lake, to do it. And when I came back, I found out that your grandfather—" Miguel closed his eyes. So Jorge wasn't in the workshop anymore, so. "Forgive me," he heard Laura whisper. He looked at her. Her big emerald eyes were very close, and in them splashed such deep sadness that Miguel couldn't hold back. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "You're not to blame for anything, Laura," he replied. "I am the one to blame." Laura stroked his hair as if she wanted to take away all his sadness, bitterness, and guilt that he had carried within him all these years. "Forgive yourself too," Laura whispered softly. "Your grandfather wouldn't want you to be sad. He always said that life is meant for joy." She hugged him, and Miguel quietly sobbed, while the scent of vanilla and orange enveloped him, giving him peace and tranquility. Then they had breakfast by the fire, and Laura said softly, "Do you think Jorge is still here? I buried him under those willows." "Let's check," Miguel replied. He brought some tools from the car, miraculously found in the trunk, and together they dug up a simple wooden box in which Jorge lay. "Where's my girlfriend? I don't want to be alone," Miguel squeaked in a thin voice, imitating the doll's speech. "She's in the backpack," Laura smiled, replied. "Lucia has been with me all these years, waiting for Jorge." Then the girl was silent for a while and added, "And I was waiting for you, Miguel. I watched your show every week. I thought you had changed a lot, become heartless. But when I accidentally saw you helping your grandmother in the supermarket, I realized that you were still the same Miguelito. And then I decided to give you Jorge's drawing." Miguel looked at the girl with gratitude and love. "Laura, I've been running away from myself and my own memories for so long. But it was a path to nowhere." For a while, he frowned, then the wrinkles on his forehead smoothed out, and he laughed. "How glad I am that fate threw me that old lady. Thanks to her, I found you again, my Laura." Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.